we'll get things going. Once again, I'm excited to welcome Ryan Scott, to our session today. Ryan is former design lead at Airbnb and founder of Accelerate Design. He'll dive into the topic of maximizing the business impact of UX design. And before we officially dive in, a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, so don't worry, you don't need to take furious notes by any means. We will send you the recording via email afterwards. We will also have some time for Q&A at the end. There should be a Q&A box in the webinar chat. I encourage you to ask your questions to Ryan in the Q&A box specifically, as opposed to the general chat. Easier for us to find them and source them at the end. One more quick FYI, we'll just have a couple of slides, a couple intro slides here. And at the end, or in the middle, we'll turn off the slides just to focus on the conversation. So don't be alarmed, you're not missing any content. We just don't have slides today. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let me stop sharing my screen. So, alrighty. Sorry, one second, lots of tabs. Okay, so Ryan, we've talked about this a little bit in our intro. Let me pull this up. Okay, for UX designers and researchers, the ability to tie our work into business impact is a critical skill, but one that's just kind of tough to quantify, or how do we describe it exactly? The work that designers do isn't always measurable or easy to quantify, but our stakeholders want information in a specific way. So I will ask you the first question. What are the biggest reasons that you feel that business leaders misunderstand design's impact?
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you first for having me. I'm super excited to talk to the group here. This is something I didn't have a good perspective on for most of my career as a designer. I got a degree in graphic design, so I got an art degree and then went into Silicon Valley. And only after working as a designer in-house for the better part of a decade, probably, did I end up going and getting my MBA from Berkeley. And that's really where I started to identify some of the challenges that designers are facing and have a new perspective and new language for what is going on in our industry and why it's hard for us. And so one thing, kind of going to Berkeley and immersing myself in this environment, it felt like a user research process at all, like designers sneaking into business school to learn. Like I felt like Jane Goodall and the Gorillas. There were two designers out of 300 people in my class, so definitely the minority. And it was really interesting. One of the things that was most interesting to me was I had a design thinking class. It was a requirement. So you have to learn marketing, statistics, management, accounting, microeconomics, macroeconomics, and design thinking. And I thought, Berkeley's so far ahead. This is so great. They're getting some exposure to design. I love this. And then so many people didn't understand the value of the class that the next year it was transitioned to an elective instead of a requirement. So part of the problem here is that design leaders, firstly, if you even go to business school, which most, or business leaders, if you go to business school, which most people don't, you're not being taught. And so there just is a lack of awareness. Haas, Berkeley's business school, is top 20 in the world, I just found out the other day, and they're not getting any access to design. So that's part of the problem. Another part of the problem is that the way you're taught often, these types of disciplines I mentioned, like statistics, finance, economics, so many things are about inputs and outputs. You have a formula, and there's a right way and a wrong way to deploy the formula. And if you get the wrong answer, there's an objectively wrong answer, there's an objectively right answer. And if you get the wrong answer, you lose points. You're supposed to go back because you made a mistake. And so you kind of get trained into that type of thinking, that there's this like linear relationship between inputs and outputs. And if I'm not seeing what I think I should be seeing, there must be something wrong, go back. And so design just doesn't work that way. It's not an input output type of thing. And so any type of creative work, any type of knowledge work, that's a problem. The last thing I'll say on this topic is that going a little bit more broadly, I read an awesome book over the summer called Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. Highly recommend that. It shed a light for me on so many things. And kind of the book posited that since the Industrial Revolution, there's this way of working that was a factory setting that became, from an agricultural background to industrial. And it was people at an assembly line all doing their little tasks. And that's what, this very like put steel here, you all do these things, and then car produced at the end. And the idea there's just like linear rate of production. You know, you got more workers, you have this assembly line, you go faster, you get more cars. And that's now that we've kind of transitioned from industrial work to knowledge work, we don't really understand how to culturally break away from that. The idea that inspiration is non-linear. Like you might be in the shower thinking about something, all of a sudden it comes to you. That's just not something that's easy to understand. That's not something that's baked into our culture in a lot of ways. It's not how you're taught in business school. So there's a lot of things from not being taught about design to being taught to think differently about solving problems to just culturally this backdrop that kind of undermines the way that knowledge workers or creative type workers work. Um, Sets us up in a lot of ways to have a disconnect in the way we work and the value of our work from what people are expecting to see when it comes to that value.
Yeah, absolutely. That's completely fair. And I think that is already making me think as a marketing person, I'm like, I could probably talk about that for forever as well.
Yes, I relate to this too as a non-designer. Yes, exactly.
Yes, but on the reverse, a little bit to dig into this a little bit more, how does a lack of business acumen limit a designer's ability to influence?
Yeah, this was something I definitely didn't realize until later, until going into business school. And someone asked me this interesting question actually and used this exact framework and language. When I told them I was going to business school, I was talking to a data scientist, like, what's the ROI of going to business school? I don't know, man. Like, there's so many variables. How are you supposed to know? But I felt like it was something I should do. And, you know, I work in a business who does, they want to do businessy type things and achieve businessy type outcomes. And I, as a designer, am expected to deliver on some of those, but I don't really understand how they work. So for me, I just like, okay, let's just get under the hood and I'll see what I see. And I learned so much that I didn't realize actually was expected of me or would have helped my design career. So one thing that like culturally, from an identity perspective, that designers do is we kind of other ourselves. So one thing that I really caution designers against is this idea of like, well, I'm a creative. Like I don't need to understand business. Or the worst permutation of that is, well, I'll understand business when they understand design. And if you want a seat at the table, I kind of liken this to you go to a foreign country, you're like, I don't want to eat their food or speak their language. You know, it's like, what does that say about you? That's not the right vibe. If you want to acclimate, if you want those people to take you seriously, you're like, that's not my jam though. Sorry. You know, design is a function, and every other function like marketing, HR, sales are all kind of business functions. So it's like design is the one function that isn't like the others. That's not really a great position to put yourself in if you want to be taken seriously. Be like, no, we're different and special over here. Well, that doesn't, you know, it doesn't matter to us. So, firstly, like designers need a mindset shift a lot of times to get over that point. Uh, when it comes to our careers, there's this what I call like a stall point, where earlier in your career, you know, you're kind of a junior designer, you're getting your bearings. You can invest in technical skills as a designer. You're like, I'm going to learn Figma better. I'm going to learn design systems. Learn maybe not right now AI. Like these types of things are really relevant. Um, Eventually, you get kind of diminishing returns, is what you call it in economics, right? You can't just like get promoted to chief design officer or VP of design because you're so much better at Figma than everyone else. It takes more types of skills to get to a certain level. And so probably around that like senior product designer level, people start to plateau and they're like, I can't just get better at Figma anymore. What do I need? And usually the answer is some, you know, more development in the business skills. What I find is challenging for designers. You say, go learn business. There's this kind of like, kind of scared reaction or like, you know, not interested in that, or it's a lot, right? Business is too big of a category and it's too abstract. So what I find is really useful is let's break it down and talk about what part of business are we talking about because it's too catch-all as it stands. So if you said like, you know, you don't as a designer need to learn accounting, like I would totally agree with you. I paid $6,500 to take my accounting course. It was interesting. I'm running my own business now. It's relevant sometimes, but as a designer, probably don't need to worry about accounting. But you know, if you're thinking about I want my designs to ship, well, they ship depending on an A/B test. And so knowing some statistics is probably really relevant for you if you want to be able to analyze the data and get things out the door. If you want your PMs to listen to you, actually going and studying product management, so you're speaking the same language, it's probably very useful to you. If you want people to buy into your ideas, well, you're probably talking about negotiation. If you want people to get excited about what you're working on, you're probably talking about marketing. If you want to be a leader and manage a large team, now we're talking about operations and management. And those are all classes that I took. And so I realized like these are all things that I want to do, goals I have in my career, or areas I want to have influence. It's useful to know statistics, product management, negotiation, marketing, management, operations. All of those things already plug into the work we're doing. And so for me, it's just been kind of a supercharger in terms of how I'm able to talk to other people that aren't designers and how I'm able to actually do my own design work better. So it has a lot of impact understanding key skills that you are probably already need, probably have some baseline in, but getting more skill set in those areas, more focus in those areas, really useful.
I love that reframe because yeah, to your point exactly, like saying I need to learn like a whole new function is extremely daunting. It's like I mean, accounting is one example. It's like I don't necessarily need to know about accounting, but I maybe need to know like like these types of statistics, this types of numbers, or to your point, like I don't need to know sales, but I do need to know how to negotiate or make a case for something. Just even, yeah, thinking of it that way, like suddenly makes it like a lot more accessible. It seems like a thing that, oh, I can learn how to do this particular skill. I don't need to learn
Right.
like how to sell to enterprise or whatever. Yeah.
Right. And even in business school, like you take all of those courses and you take them for 8 to 10 weeks, right? You're getting it's going kind of deep, but it's not like I can take one sales course and be a salesperson now. So it's great about business schools. They just like expose you to so many things, and then you can figure out where you need to focus. And so I'm a big believer in designers getting that exposure. And this is what I do now is like teach these skills to designers. Because even with a little bit more exposure, it can make a huge difference in our careers and our ability to be effective in the business.
Absolutely. To dig in a little bit more to, so we talked about, why business leaders don't understand design, and then why designers generally need to learn more business acumen or like what the purpose is of that. Instead of designers fully shifting to like, now we only speak in our stakeholders' language. How do we bridge that gap instead? Because to your point, like it's hard to expect either function to be like, okay, I'm gonna fully do what you do now. I'm gonna fully immerse into this. How do we meet in the middle a little bit?
Yeah, I don't think there's any risk of designers not being designers anymore. It's pretty baked into us. It's kind of often part of our identity. And so what I advocate is like, even if you're like, just change the language you use or change the framing of the things you do. Um, that can be enough to like bridge that gap because there is this gap between the business people and the design people, and the language we use is often very different. So we'll say like, I did XYZ project, like we built a design system, and then we don't say anything else after that. Or, we change this flow to reduce cognitive load. That doesn't like intrinsically mean anything to an executive. So you kind of have to like make sure these things don't get lost in translation. At Airbnb, a lot of my work was reviewed by Brian Chesky, the CEO, and he's the only person I've seen who like understands the intrinsic value of reducing cognitive load and is going to be able to track that back to why this is good for the business. Most other people need a little bit more explanation, right? You can't just leave it at I produced work that's good. We understand why that's good, but we need to help others understand that too. And that's part of us having empathy for where other people are at, which designers are great at. We employ that empathy internally. It's super useful. So one of the ways I've done this is we still want to be user centric. We still want to think about that perspective, and it's good for us to bring that perspective to the business table. We're not the only people that think about users. Marketers think about users, sales think about users. Like, so we shouldn't think that we're exclusive in this way, but it's good for us to infuse the company with empathy and these other types of things. So what can help? Because it feels daunting to say, how does my work hit metrics? How does my work hit financial outcomes? Is to think about we have to kind of stair step our way there. And this is one of the things that I teach, and one of the frameworks I teach is that anytime you're making a change in the product, what your ultimate goal is is to change someone's behavior. Like we made the button bigger, so we want them to click on it more. Or we made this more clear, and we're going to help them get through this flow easier. So what we're doing is this design work produces some kind of behavior or attitude shift for people. They're able to do something, or they feel differently about our product. So then that shows up in the metrics. If someone feels like, maybe we reduce friction in a flow, they're like this. It's the type of feedback you'd hear in user research, right? This isn't as frustrating before. Okay, cool. If something's no longer frustrating, that probably has a pretty good impact on things like retention. They might refer their friends to the product. That's going to change the customer acquisition cost if people are organically referring each other because it's not frustrating anymore. So you can start to say like the types of fuzzy emotional behavioral things the designers are comfortable with and business people are not comfortable with. If you can track that back to some kind of metrics, that's where we can kind of bridge that gap. Another example is like if you improve information hierarchy, someone say maybe, oh, I know where to find what it is I need. Okay, if people can find what they need when they need it, what types of metrics might be impacted? Time on task, completion rate. If people are able to complete the tasks that they want to complete and do it easily, maybe that affects NPS and they feel better about our product. If NPS is being improved, maybe retention then is being improved because they like our product better. And that's improving customer acquisition costs, which is improving profits. So I think that's the missing step for a lot of designers is let's talk about our work, but then let's talk about the behavioral or attitude kind of change that's happening for the user. Those are the things that are really the foundation. Those changes in the customer are the foundation that we're seeing in the metrics. And that makes it a little bit easier to understand if someone likes this better, what metrics might be attached to that. That's a good approach that tends to work really well with people I teach.
Absolutely. It sounds like it's more of like instead of just this is what we did, this is literally how this changed this, and then this is how this can eventually tie to, like you said, retention, profit. It just, it gets there. It's all tied in. It's just a matter of kind of framing it in that way.
Right.
Um,
It's useful for designers to know those metrics. And so the more you ask and understand what metrics different teams care about, the better. It's going to just help you understand how your work plugs into the big picture. And one easy way to do that is go talk to those teams about what they care about. You're going to learn about what the metrics are, why they're important, what we're being goaled on right now. And if you can say like, I know why NPS is important to marketing, I know why conversion is important to product, I know why some kind of sales velocity is important to sales, then you can say, okay, here's how my work is going to help you. If you're working on NPS and we make this more clear, easier to use, that's going to change how much people like our product and how much it feels like it's actually solving a problem for them. That's going to impact NPS. And the marketing team can say, you can have a conversation about it. Marketing team says, I love that. That's great. Or they say, I don't think so. And then you keep the conversation going. But that's a great, you start with those hypotheses and it kicks off the conversation, which then develops relationships, which can lead to more influence.
Absolutely. And then everything kind of just like clicks in together a little bit more naturally. People feel the need to lean on you more, you can lean on them more. And it all kind of is like connecting to the same overarching goal, which can be hard to do, especially when we're all like kind of siloed in different functions.
Yeah.
Um, we talked a little bit about research a second ago, but kind of tying all these things together and storytell, like being able to tell a good story or a compelling story, lends itself to talking a little bit more about user research specifically. Could you walk us through some moments where you've conducted user research and how it's been like where it's been most effective in your design process?
Yeah. I am like not a user researcher. And so my process has not been academically approved. I've definitely cut corners. And usually I deploy user research in a way that's like I have a stakeholder and I'm trying to convince them in some way. And so I will do the research I need to do to help try to paint that picture and tell that story in a way that's going to be compelling. And this is kind of a sales and negotiation tactic. Um, where I've plugged in research really depends on the stage of the project. And I wanted to kind of share a framework that I teach and talk about and thought about a lot. And it took me a long time to figure this out. It's kind of what are the stages of the product development process. And I think there's kind of three things that have to be true. You have to identify these three things. You have to identify, is there a need for whatever it is we want to build or some type of problem to solve? What approach do we take? And then how well do we execute it? So it could be like, are you hungry? Do you want Italian, Thai, or Mexican food? If you want Italian, maybe you choose chicken parmesan and it's got to be cooked well. It can't be like too spicy. It can't be frozen. Like the execution of that specific thing has to be done well. And so I think it's really useful. You want to think about, all right, like what product teams do is they make this mistake of like, well, I cooked you raw chicken parmesan and you didn't like it. Clearly, no one's hungry. It's like, no, those are two really different things. Or like, you didn't want my chicken parmesan. You must not like Italian food. It's like, no, I love Italian. I just didn't want that one thing. So like, let's not conflate the need I'm hungry with Italian, Thai, and Mexican, and then the execution is a specific meal. Like, let's not mix those things up and make come to conclusions that aren't true. Extrapolate those things too far. And so at the need stage, it's really important to, like, you want to assess demand here, right? It's and A/B testing, by the way, is so bad at this. I think it's such a bad idea to build something and run an A/B test and be like, well, yep, people don't want that thing we just spent time building. It's very expensive to do that. And this is one of the areas where if you want to identify a need, you want to identify potential demand for something, research is so important. It's the like cheapest way to understand whether we should do anything in this space. Um, One good example. So I joined one company we haven't talked about yet. I was very early on at DoorDash. I joined right after the Series B. There were like 30 people at headquarters. I reported to a co-founder, and I joined right after the 2 year. I joined right for the 2 year anniversary, like birthday party of the company. So we talk about DoorDash a lot, and people are like, "Oh, that big company that's public and stuff." It's like, no, 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 very small, based out of an animal hospital in Palo Alto that didn't have air conditioning in the summer. Not glamorous startup. Um, and so I got to build a lot of things from the ground up and identify needs and propose them and get them on the roadmap. And you probably all used some of them. One of the things I really spearhead, I was the design lead for the Dasher product, and I realized that we weren't paying people very flexibly. If you think about the kind of persona of a driver on DoorDash, it's typically people who are doing this for like to make them ends meet or have a little extra cash, right? There's highly correlated with kind of some degree of financial insecurity. And so what we were doing at the time was only paying people once a week, and they'd have to wait. If you dashed on Tuesday, you got to wait until next Monday to get paid out. And I did some analysis and did some competitive analysis and looked at uh, that was the least flexible payment option of all of our competitors. So we're really potentially not meeting people's needs here. And the product team was like, that's not enough evidence that we should do this. This should be a priority. Just looking at the competitors and realizing we're last isn't compelling enough. So I actually went into this really kind of scrappy poll. I was part of like a 5,000 person Facebook group of Bay Area drivers and just did this like quick poll and said, would you use this? Yes or no? And like 87% of people said, yes, I would absolutely use this. Probably like not a representative sample, all like so many probably academic issues with that, but it was enough to get the PMs to say, okay, like clearly there's demand here. Before we build anything, we should do this. So that's a good like use of research in that kind of need phase. Um, for approach, like you want to say, are we doing the right thing? We've identified a need. You're hungry, but do you want Italian, Mexican, or Thai? Um, you really want to make sure that you're kind of pointed in the right direction. One story is that at DoorDash, we tracked a metric called missing and incorrect. And we realized that Taco Bell, missing and incorrect items that were lost something, that weren't accurate, highly correlated with taco like seasoning, highly correlated with hot sauces. So people said, oh, well, clearly people aren't getting their hot sauces. Let's just build something to help them, like remind drivers, don't forget the hot sauces. And for me as a designer, I was like, really, is that driving all this support calls? It's like the missing hot sauce is really upsetting people. And so thinking about user behavior, digging in a little bit deeper, the problem was you go to Taco Bell, you've got a line of people behind you, you've got an app with little gray font, and people have ordered 10 tacos and they're all customized. And you might be English as a second language, speaking to someone who's English as a second language, and you've got all these people behind you saying, go faster. Is just going to be human error introduced into that process. And so by like talking to people and understanding what they're facing in the real world, instead of like building some modal that says, don't forget the hot sauces and thinking we've solved the problem, it's actually really useful to dig in a little bit deeper and say, maybe what we should do is just give those people a tablet and stop asking our drivers to order something verbally from person to person. So that is where I think it's like really useful again to like plug into what direction do we take if we've identified a need. And then last, really quickly, just like execution, I think it's always valuable. This is where A/B testing becomes, I think, really relevant is how do people behave at scale? And have we built something that is checking the box for them? And it's great to collect that data, but it's always relevant to go talk to people and say, hey, here's what we're doing. We've got a quick prototype. Um, does this meet your needs? And what's useful about that and pairing that with A/B testing is A/B testing is going to show you what is happening, but often not why. And when you don't have the why, people guess. And then it's just got another hypothesis. And we don't know whether that's true, but often people just like, well, the data says this, it must be for this reason. Let's move forward. It's like, okay, like maybe not. Why don't we go back to our well, go talk to our customers. They're going to help provide some context to this data. And so I feel like A/B testing is something that's really useful at the end for a lot of reasons, and research is really useful all the way through that process to help make sure you're solving a real need for people, you're pointing in the right direction, and not going to build the wrong thing, and then you actually execute it well. You cook that chicken parmesan very well, and you season it perfectly. Then we're still going to go ask our customer, did we season this perfectly? And I think that's the right way to deploy research throughout that process.
You season it perfectly and you get the hot sauce. You get it all. So
Yes, why not? Let's
of
do all of it.
course, throw it in. Yes. No, I love that. That's so important. That's something that we talk about a lot at DScout, of course, like as a experience research platform. It's like, you can find the what, but really getting down to the why really will, help solve both research and design and product and business needs altogether. So
Yeah. And now that I'm running my own business, I see this from such a different perspective too. Like I literally use that kind of model every day. And so what I'm doing now is kind of taking my MBA and taking things I've learned from places like DoorDash and Airbnb and creating courses for designers, helping them level up those specific types of business skills that we talked about earlier. So the first thing I do is like talk to designers and say, where are their needs? Where are their gaps? What might help people move their careers further ahead. And then I'll go talk to them and say, like, okay, if we did I just launched a PM course for designers. If we do that, like, what do you want to learn? And that's the approach side. Like, are you struggling with roadmaps? Are you struggling with prioritization, with metrics? Like, what should we put into this thing? And then, of course, like, I'll launch a course and I'll get reviews and feedback, and then I refine the execution. But what's great about doing this type of research throughout is that when I launch some product, it's still a product development process, even though it's not a digital product, it's a course. It's different, but it's follows the same pattern and the same path. Um, I don't do like an MVP. I don't do something that's like cheap and easy to see whether there's demand. I don't really believe in that. I go talk to people, identify real need. I know exactly what they want to have in the course, and then I like work my butt off to make this thing from V1 as good as it can possibly be. And then we'll fine tune it. It'll be 88% of the way there. And then I'm going to tweak it over the next number of cohorts. But I don't move forward with anything I'm not 1,000% confident is going to be something that's useful to designers and useful to their careers. And so for me, even as an entrepreneur, and not even doing digital products, doing some other totally type of different product development, like research throughout is the way that I'm able to know I'm doing the right thing. I'm not wasting my time and resources as a solopreneur. I'm building something people actually is going to be useful to them and help our industry. And I'm going to feel confident that I can invest a lot of time and energy into that thing being really good right out the gate instead of kind of producing half-baked MVPs and then like waiting to see what happens.
yeah, I mean, we actually are working on another like report guide that talks about specifically that, like what is the time is money, just because you made a bunch of things and are the waiting time, that's costing you as well. It's not just um like people will talk about how like it's expensive to invest, like to put time into research. It's also expensive to spend a lot of time on the wrong thing.
Oh my
So
gosh, it's so much more expensive because what happens is teams jump so quickly to that end. If you think about each of these three things have to be validated separately. You have to be real need, you have to pick the right approach, and you have to do the execution. When they rush right to execution, then you've introduced and this is good. We want to talk about it this way. It's like statistics. You've introduced a million different variables now, and then they don't know which variable is off. Is there not a real need? Did we just choose the wrong direction? Is the execution wrong? Like, we don't know. We just skipped a bunch of validation and went right to the end. And now it could be anything or a combination of things. And so, not doing research and not kind of validating those pieces bit by bit is insanely expensive because then I call it just guess and check. You're just going to throw experiments at the wall and then wait to see a metric move. And maybe the metric moves the way you want. And then you're like, yay, but you still don't know why. And then it's not very repeatable, is it? So it just doesn't make sense to me, teams that think that like some of these other methodologies are silver bullets. Like no tool is a silver bullet. It should be relied on outside of the constraints of when the best time in the project is.
Absolutely. To shift a little bit, we talked about this again a little, we peppered this in throughout. Um, can you share an example of how this type of work or this research and this storytelling has driven, I will say this loosely, measurable change? Or what does measurable even look like? Because obviously that's something that stakeholders often ask about and what they look for. Like, tell me about measuring this impact.
Yeah, I think that this is such a loaded word. And a lot of times people will ask for something measurable, and what they mean is kind of like detectable. I think designers get pulled into this measurable world, and it often comes because designers report up to product managers, and product managers are incentivized and want to run an experiment, move some metric, prove that they did those things so they can get promoted and hired and all these types of things. So much of what we do, again, going back to like Cal Newport and the cultural aspects of coming out of this world where we've got an assembly line. We should be able to measure the output of something based on the input and change some levers to do things faster. And there's some kind of like, if I add one more person, it's 3 times faster at this point in the operational flow. Great, awesome. If you're building Model Ts, go to town. It's really difficult then to like apply that thinking outside of very specific situations. And so sometimes business people will say like, what's the ROI on this? What they really want to know is kind of bang for your buck, right? A lot of times we're not asked to like calculate the ROI of something, but it's reasonable to want to know, well, if we invest in this, what are we going to get out of it? And so sometimes I think we get hung up on this word, and designers try to then go and do this measurable activity, and it's immeasurable. It's very difficult to do. How would you measure, like, I made a good point in a meeting and it changed the direction of the feature? Like, okay, put a number to that. It's impossible. You can't do that. So, one thing I try to do when I get questions like this, like, well, how would you measure that? Sometimes it's an appropriate and question, but sometimes it's not. I like to say that the appropriate moment for this is like when it comes down to the pixels, like what was the value of that feature, or how, like, okay, we can launch the feature, we can do an A/B test, we can see some data come back. That's totally appropriate. What was the value of Ryan being in the room for 47 minutes? Makes no sense whatsoever. Because you can't measure the opposite situation. There's no A/B test. I was in the room or I wasn't in the room, and you can't go back and have some hypothetical alternative reality where I wasn't in the room and we can compare and contrast those things. So when it comes to pixels and features, the atoms, the pieces of the product, sure, we can measure a lot. When it comes to the people and the process, that quickly becomes immeasurable. So one thing I try to do is try to like reframe these types of questions and say, instead of saying, your specific wording on this question was like, when your storytelling is driven measurable change, can we reframe that to say, significant change or had significant influence, like move the needle in some way for the business? And then it kind of opens up the framing, and I can talk more broadly about some of these instances and tell those stories a little bit easier. If you're interviewing, by the way, this is a good tactic to kind of like reframe the question a little bit in a way that maybe makes it a little bit easier or even just possible for you to respond. So, and then the next step, I'm going to get hung up on the word measurable. I'm going to get hung up on the word influence. And let's talk about what influence is. I really feel like influence is kind of like shaping an outcome towards something that you believe to be right. Sometimes that means you're getting something on the roadmap, you're tweaking a feature in certain ways that you think is better, you're advocating for something not being shipped, and ultimately it's about getting people behind those situations. So sometimes you have measurable types of things and evidence. I try to say like zoom out, and this is where I think you can make user research part of the conversation. Is people say, well, what's the data say? It's like, let's look at data as a piece of evidence. There's a lot of other types of evidence. Let's do competitive benchmarking. Let's do user research. Let's look at our own product internal health data. Let's look at what we're seeing in the App Store. Let's look at what we're hearing back from sales or support teams. Let's paint a broader picture of what's going on besides just data that's measurable, and say like, okay, we're seeing a high correlation between this and this and this, and all these things put together kind of start to paint us a picture. Before you've shipped anything, you don't have perfect data, something that's really measurable. You have to ship something first. And so a lot of that comes down to consensus based on evidence. And so user research is a huge point in that. Evidence, kind of as a tool, as part of like that tool in the tool kit. So that's how I think of things. What's great about this is that founders, I find especially, have to see things at a 10,000-foot view, have to see things across silos and organizations. And when you start a tiny business, like DoorDash was very, very small when I started. And the kind of founding story was they went down to University Avenue. They spoke to restaurants and said, what are your needs? They started with research. They started with going and talk to those people. So data comes later. Data comes at a certain point in scale. But a lot of times people who have started companies know the value of research, and you might have to remind them, but it's often kind of baked into uh, the founding story in some way. So sometimes you can find an ally in people who started businesses or at the founder level for these types of things.
Absolutely. And that actually leads very well into the next question that we talked about a little bit before. Um, so especially when it comes to research, it can be seen as like this long part of the process, like a long step, maybe even an expensive step. But so how do you navigate pushback from stakeholders who prioritize short-term metrics or research over long-term design or research value?
Yeah, I've got some notes on this and thoughts on this. I think the other aspect is anytime someone has some kind of preconceived notion of something, it's perfectly legit here to um, kind of reframe this for them. So I've often said this. I'm like, well, let's do some research. And sometimes when people don't understand what something is, they think of like the worst case scenario. This happens. This is a human thing. So they'll say, "Oh, we don't have 6 weeks for research." They're worried about like my time, how much I've been given. I'm a PM. I have very little control. Someone's told me to do this. I need to ship it by this point, otherwise I'm getting fired. So they're gonna be afraid of what you're saying unless you're more specific. Be like, I've had to literally say, no, no, I don't mean 6 weeks. I mean 2 days. Can we have 2 days? So humans base all of our decisions based on a relationship between value, cost, and risk. And when we don't understand something, we tend to underestimate the value, overestimate the cost, and overestimate the risk. And so the first thing you can do is start to say, I'm not talking about a long-term bet here. Like, if people are definitely incentivized to hit short-term wins, can we talk about things and reframe things? Be like, I don't mean this is a 6-week project. I mean, it's a 2-day project. Can I have 2 days, please? Makes it a little bit easier. So let's start with that. When we need to reframe something, we can. The other thing I'll say is that, we talk about this relationship between short-term versus long-term. And I think, there's kind of this, I think, within design culture, this intrinsic belief that uh, short term is bad and long term is always good. And I don't think that's true. It really depends on the stage of the business. If you're a tiny startup and literally you're going to run out of runway next week, you have to move so fast, and you're just trying to keep the lights on. You're trying to put out the fires. And I've been at companies at this stage, and you're just like scrambling for survival. You're not thinking about next year. And it's not always appropriate to spend too much time thinking about next year because so much is going to change. And so I don't believe it's always intrinsically bad to be short-sighted, for a period of time. One thing that I like to kind of level set with designers, I ask them sometimes, who believes that UX debt is good? And I've asked this to a few groups, and like literally no one raises their hand. And I think this is one of those instances of like the way we believe we work and what's good for the business and how business people might perceive something like debt. In finance, it was really interesting to study finance, and one of the kind of things that made us all double take was when our professor said debt is good. Debt is a useful tool. And it's really about how much debt are you accruing and how much is that debt costing you. So I have a mortgage on my house, but the equity on the house is increasing at a faster pace than the interest rate is I'm being charged. So I took out a loan. That was a smart move. I'm getting more money than it's costing me. Credit card debt is so destructive because the rate is so high. You quickly get underwater and get completely overwhelmed, destroys your credit rating. It's bad. So there's good debt and bad debt. And it's about, does it unlock value or does it block value? So mortgage might unlock value. It's a great way to develop your wealth. Credit card is not a good way to develop your wealth and is going to block value in your life. So early on, incurring some kind of UX debt or tech debt, it might actually help you get something out to customers faster. And it's more valuable at some point in the business to get something out faster and be like, yeah, I know we're getting some debt in there, but we need to move quickly. Otherwise, the lights turn off next week and we're all fired. Okay, cool. Like let's keep track of the debt we're accumulating. We don't want to lose track of it, but it's okay to accept that that short term is you know useful and is valuable and maybe the right thing to do in some instances. Um, there's a turning point where you can't keep accruing debt, and eventually you slowly get to this point where it's like we can't even ship a simple feature because the back end is so screwed up that we're blocked now. We like it's going to take 6 weeks to do something simple just because we have to jump over so much, UX debt or tech debt. So much BS has accumulated over time. And this is pretty common with businesses. They just accumulate, and something that was good and enabling becomes destructive, but it happens so progressively we don't detect it until it's kind of too late. So I just want to introduce the idea that like short term versus long term, it's not always good versus bad, and something like debt is not always good versus bad. It's really context specific. So that's a first kind of point to level set on. Um, Overall, though, having said that, the classic business school, it depends. Um, this is a huge like problem. There's a reason like in late stage capitalism, human nature, like we're going to prioritize short term over long term. It's why global warming is an issue, and we're not looking like we know how to solve it at all. So it's a huge problem for society, not just for products, not just for businesses. One thing that has worked for me, there's a couple things you can do to approach this. Again, we talked about kind of value, cost, and risk as levers in decision making, is when people often are underestimating. We talked about when people don't understand something, they underestimate value and they overestimate cost and they overestimate risk. You can kind of flip this on its head. You can say, if we do it this way, we're actually potentially reducing the value and we're increasing the cost and we're increasing the risk. So you can just start to make people aware that these trade-offs exist. And sometimes the most you can do is just say, let's have the conversation. Let's just get this on the record. We're making some trade-offs here. Are we okay with those trade-offs? Sometimes you are, and that's okay, but at least you had the conversation. Um, One of the coolest things I got to do over the last year is I got to be the keynote speaker at Robinhood's annual design team offsite. And I flew to New York to talk to the team, which was super cool. And a designer there asked me one of the best questions I've heard. I was talking to them about, we use empathy as designers. We face that empathy externally to users. We should face it more internally to our stakeholders if we want to gain influence with them and really understand that being a PM sucks sometimes. How can I help you do your job better and not get fired? And the person asked, how can designers be empathetic to ourselves, which is such a cool question. And it took me a while to kind of come up with what I thought was a good approach. And some of it is, do your best and let go, right? It's not all up to us. Business leaders have to decide these things. And so understanding that like one, short term versus long term is not good versus evil necessarily. It's all very cultural and or all very like stage specific for the business. There are cultural issues in late stage capitalism with like people want to keep prioritizing short term. If the business is public, you got to report every quarter your earnings. That just kind of incentivizes you to think that way. And so that's partially just the way the world is in what we're facing. The best you can do is try to have those conversations, try to visualize those trade-offs for people, help move the conversation in that direction, at least get them on the record. And if the answer is no, we can't do that this time, okay, like you did your piece, you made your points, and we'll just move on to the next thing we want to advocate for.
I love that. That's a super excellent point and a great question. I mean, everyone's very quick to be hard on themselves. So obviously taking that time to just be like, let's shift in and be like, what actually, what are we doing now that is effective? I will say, I think we have a few questions. We got about 15 minutes left. I have a couple more questions on hand, but to sum up this portion before we switch over to the Q&A from our audience, what would you say, like to summarize what we've talked about so far, what
Yeah.
are the top things the designers should start doing to better showcase their value now?
Yeah, I mean, I've got 3 or 4 tips on this. The biggest one is like, firstly, you have to start with you and that mindset shift of, we're not if we want to see the table, if we want to have influence in whatever way that takes shape, it's going to be different if you're a chief design officer versus a senior product designer. If you want to like move the needle in some way, you can't also other yourself. You can't be like, we're creatives, we're not business people, we're something different and special, but please take us seriously and invite us to all the meetings, even though we don't want to really understand what it is you do or why it matters. Like you can't have both those things be true. So I think the sooner that we realize that design is a business function in a lot of ways, it's your responsibility to balance the user needs and the business needs. And I really do feel like that's what separates design from art in a lot of ways is you have an objective, you have a goal, and it's often a business goal. And that's okay. Like, we need to keep the lights on. We want to have a business that's profitable, that can continue to last and provide value to people. If you don't do those things, your business goes away and you're not really helping anyone. So if we think about ourselves as part of the herd a little bit and not other ourselves quite so much, that mentality shift a little bit helps start that conversation. The other one is it's kind of our responsibility to describe the value of our work to other people and sell them on it. I really do believe that they're not going to come to us. We really need to come to them, and that's why I'm so passionate about helping designers learn the skills to do that. Um, One of the things this last year that has been really impactful to me is I've gotten to know Katrina Alcorn a little bit. Met her at a conference and spoken to her and had lunch with her. And she's an outstanding human being. Was also the GM of design at IBM, and I was really intimidated at first, to be honest. She's delightful, but also 1,000 designers, and I was like, this is as I can't even imagine that. That's a huge, impressive team, and it objectively is. But IBM is also a company of 300,000 employees. So even the largest design team I had ever heard of is still 1% of the population of this company. So we were always going to be a minority. We were always going to be a small and mighty team wherever we are. And then I think it really is up to us if we are, people going to sell design to customers, then we need to demonstrate the value of that design and we need to figure out what the value props are. We need to know how our product resonates with our customers so we can sell it effectively and get it to them and know what they care about. I feel like designers and researchers should be very good at, okay, tell me what your needs are. How can I help you meet those needs? We can do that with users and we can do that with internal stakeholders. We have a lot of skill sets there already. So firstly, yeah. Second is that's our responsibility. Those business tools we talked about are so necessary. If you want to move up in your career, if you feel like your career is kind of stalling out and you don't know why, you're probably missing marketing skills, negotiation skills, statistics, product management, operations. There's pieces that you absolutely need to be a very effective designer and to move up. And a lot of the people I've taught have had a lot of success deploying these skills and are getting pulled into more strategic projects, are getting promoted, are getting better, newer, higher paying jobs, even in this market. There are things that are super, super useful. The thing that you can really start today is to understand your business better, is to start asking questions. There were so many times, I've been so guilty of this my whole career, where I wanted to be a very dutiful designer. And a PM would say, here's what you need to do. Here's your project. Be like, great. Starting on the wireframes, going to talk to people. And I often didn't just like raise my hand and say, why are we doing this? Why does this matter to the business? What are our success metrics? How can I help you hit your goals? I just started getting into the pixels. So it's very comfortable for me. And so one of the best things you can do to just develop your influence is to start asking questions, start developing those relationships, show an interest in what are we doing? Why does it matter? How do these things all connect? And how can I help move the needle, move the ball down the field? You want to be on the same team and you all want to be seen as moving the ball down the field. And so just asking people, showing an interest in the PM, showing an interest in the marketing people is a huge way to just kick off those relationships in a good way. You want to avoid people feeling like, well, why does design matter? Why are designers even in the room? And when you develop those relationships by just talking to them and getting to know them, you're not going to face those types of hard questions that are very difficult to solve. You're going to mitigate a lot of that. And that's where we want to be. We want to mitigate a lot of those hard positions and just avoid getting into them to begin with.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for that portion. Super, super enlightening. I'm gonna actually shift it over to our Q&A portion. I'm actually gonna share my screen again really quick. But reminder for folks, drop your questions in the Q&A part of the of the Zoom feature. We'll look there for questions. Ryan, are you ready for your first one?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. So from Rolf Nelson, how much confidence can we ascribe to proxy-based user feedback, i.e. sales speaking for partners prior to the experience launch, as motivations can be, sorry, I'm not reading this with the right cadence. I.e. sales speaking for partners prior to the experience launch, as motivations can be a conflict of interest. What's the best path to validate?
Yeah, good question. Again, I'm not a user researcher, but I'll tell you, um, it comes down to evidence and inputs, and I'm always very happy to have as much data on the table as possible. I think what you're kind of bringing up is the idea of bias, and it's true. People are going to, um, be incentivized a certain way. They're going to see things through a different perspective. The best times that I ever did, like the best experience I ever had with user research was involving a cross-functional team. Actually, at Airbnb, we did a huge project. There were 4 designers and 8 engineers and 1 PM and 1 researcher. And the task was to redesign Airbnb's entire mobile website end to end in a year and rebuild it from the ground up, blow up the whole thing that existed and do the whole thing end to end. And it was, I think, the only time probably in the company's history or near history where anyone redesigned all of Airbnb from the ground up. It sounds like a boot camp exercise. And what was great is we flew to Rio de Janeiro, we flew to Mexico City, we flew to Beijing, and we did user research sessions with prototypes and stuff in all those areas. And we always had a researcher and a designer and the engineers and the PMs in the room listening to that because we're all collecting different data points. We're all seeing it through our own lens, and then we can bring our own lens to that conversation. I think that diversity of perspective is super valuable. So I will never say that I don't want someone's perspective if they're coming from sales or marketing. I will keep that in mind that they're going to hear things a certain way, and so that's fine. I'm going to counterbalance that with my perspective. I'm going to counterbalance that with a bunch of other people's perspectives. And we're all incentivized. Like designers want to produce high craft work in part because that's what's going to get us promoted or hired at our next role. Like we all have our incentives for doing the things that we want to do. So I think it's fine for those people to be involved. I think it's an input. I wouldn't have like the whole sales team just decide what to build and put it on the roadmap. Uh, but but why not take that information and we'll, as long as we counterbalance it with other people's perspectives too, I think we can have a good, healthy conversation about it.
Awesome. Another question coming in here from Benjamin Singer. Metrics can be pretty baked in and expensive or complicated to change. Can you talk about the ways in which you negotiate for new metrics to show value?
Yeah, I'd love to know more about the situation. Again, so many of these things are very company specific and company specific in terms of stage of the company and type of culture you have. Um, this often, I've gotten this question before, and it often comes up from like, I want to tell the narrative of my work in a certain way, and I don't have either access to these metrics or these metrics aren't being recorded in some way. Someone's not giving me them access, or we just don't have them. And so the first thing I'll do is try to tell the story of my work in whatever metrics are being measured, because people are measuring the things they're incentivized to measure to begin with. And so it's like, okay, those are probably the things that are the priorities. I'm going to try to align to our priorities as a path of least resistance more often than not. If I really do feel like there's a missing piece here, I'm going to say like, yeah, we'll check the conversion box, no problem. We might also want to consider this other metric that's going to give us really interesting data in this way. We want to understand this specific thing about users and how they behave or what they think. We currently don't have this, and it wouldn't take long to implement it. What do you guys think? And kind of pitch it as an idea. I wouldn't say, I don't like your metrics, do my metrics instead. You're just going to cause a fight. But kind of a yes and approach has worked best for me. And in trying to explain, anytime I try to persuade someone, I try to say like why this is good for you. So it's going to help give us a clear picture of these things I know you care about. It's going to give us better data. So we launch something and we're less likely to have to roll it back. Whatever it is that people, the negative outcome they are trying to avoid, if you can say this is going to also help us avoid that, that's a good best practice for trying to advocate for something changing or being new.
Excellent. And I'm going to take one more here and then we'll wrap this up. This one's from Armand. As a graduate with a master's in HCI, what do you think would be the best approach in upskilling to market myself better? Is it best to lean towards business, AI integration, or both?
Uh, This is a good question. I just gave a talk on something related to this. I think both. There's this what designers do erroneously is like over-index on technical skills. So we just want to like learn more technical skills. Every time there's like a hiccup in the market, designers are like, should I learn to code? It's just another technical skill, right? I think AI is coming for those technical skills pretty quickly. And so the strategic work and asking the right questions is more and more valuable. So I think these are you've identified the two areas I do recommend people invest in. If you want to be a more successful designer, don't just do more Figma, like learn AI tools. Like that's a huge new field that is incredibly valuable. I use AI, when I'm, just writing marketing email. I use it all the time, different tools. So super valuable in streamlining your work and being more effective and getting to good answers faster. The business side of things is not going away anytime soon. And if you want people to see you as not a uh, not just a tactical person, but someone who should be involved at the table and have a strategic point of view, then the business side is going to be what helps you check that box.
Awesome. Thank you so
I would
much.
love to answer if we can answer Peter Merholtz's question because I know
Sure.
Peter. And
Yep.
do
Go
you
ahead.
mind asking that? We could do one more in the last 3 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Peter in the chat. Thank you, Peter. It's good to see you. Much of what you're saying about connecting user benefits to business benefits has been known for 30 years. Oh, I just lost it because I moved to answered. Okay, I found it because it's in the answered tab. Um, the book Cost Justifying Usability was originally published in 1994. What is about design and business that feels like these discussions haven't appreciably advanced? These are important discussions, but it's weird how little progress has been made. Yeah, I see this a lot of like, we've already had this conversation. Haven't we checked this box already? And I think it's really valid. There's a lot of tools, that have existed for a long time. It's a good point. I think what's happening is that maybe it comes down to the education system, which moves so slowly. I graduated with a degree in graphic design. I wasn't taught anything about business at all. Like I'm doing work for businesses, I'm doing websites, I'm doing logos, I'm doing marketing campaigns, and I'm not really aware, besides like the composition and the color, what I'm really trying to achieve more often than not. And with my clients, they didn't really ask me either. So I think we established that business people are really not learning anything about design, and designers aren't really learning anything about business. There are all these resources, but maybe people aren't aware of them, or sometimes the market, the timing isn't right. Like I think especially what's happening right now with the way the market's contracted, how businesses are responding to high inflation and high interest rates. Like it, sometimes even the same product at a different point in time to a different generation with a different context. You've got all these boot camp people who have come out in the last few years who now are being held to a very high standard, who are looking for answers. And so I don't think any of these conversations are kind of one and done. I don't think any of these like individual resources, like I'm great. I think it's great. If multiple people teach the same content all across the industry and everyone gets exposure to it, that's awesome. The chances of anyone reading that book, and maybe is low, or maybe the context has changed, or maybe we just need to hear it from different people in different ways and different voices, and we just have to take little bites at this huge apple over a long period of time to try to move the needle for a whole industry that's worldwide. That's the last thing I'll say is, the last year I've taught hundreds of designers from 30 or 40 countries around the world, and I've been amazed. That's one of the things I've learned. I was very surprised about is how universal some of these problems are. And I mean, I'm teaching people in like Tunisia and Croatia and then UK and US and Kenya. And it's like wherever there are designers and product teams, there are these problems. So something underlying is still not changing. And I think a lot of it comes down to the education system. Good question, Peter. Thank you so much. It's good to see you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. Let me switch us over and I know we're at 2 o'clock, at least Central Time. But a couple final send-offs here. Thank you again, Ryan, and then thank you so much to everyone who's joined us. Let's stay in touch. There's a few different ways we can do so. There's many avenues to dig more into this topic, but a couple that we'd love to recommend. One of which is Ryan's online course describing the ROI of design. We have a promo code DScout. I believe it's $150 off. Ryan, would you like to tell us more about that course? I know you have another one as well that we can drop in the follow-up email as well.
Yeah. So I've got two courses and I'm launching a third, but the two courses I'm teaching now are describing the ROI of design and a PM masterclass for designers. And basically describing the ROI of design or for designers who are at these companies that just don't kind of intrinsically understand what design does or what its value is. And you're kind of facing that miscommunication. Things are getting just lost in translation. And you might need to start explaining to people about design in using language that is business oriented so they get it. A lot of people who've taken this class have finally like gotten their suite to understand, and then the C-suite is excited. They want people to deliver more value, and so you're creating a ton of value. It's just not getting recognized because the language is wrong or different, and things are getting lost in translation. So that is what we focus on in that class: is how do we reframe our work and move the needle at our businesses in a way that people understand and we get credit for. And then my PM masterclass for designers is also on Maven, and the promo code works for that as well. That's more along the lines of I want to be a more strategically involved designer. I want to be able to find new product opportunities, know how to prioritize them, know how to get them on the roadmap, know how to analyze the A/B testing data that comes out of them. So that's much more hands-on tactical, like how do you actually find value for your business, get it on the roadmap, and ship it. So both are really important if you want to have like a very successful design career.
Awesome. Both sound awesome. And the last thing I'll say is, if you haven't already, please feel free to join our People Nerds Slack community. We have conversations like this a lot. People also plug the work that they're doing, connect with other people in the space, both design researchers, product, any people-centered folks are in that Slack community. So I appreciate the time, everyone. I appreciate the time, Ryan. And we'll talk to you all soon. We'll see you the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.